Let's start this meeting of the Harris Township Planning Commission for November 15, 2021. We have people in the fire hall in Boalsburg and people on screen. And Amy, you want to mention just a few protocol things around that?
Yeah, so the people that are in the room, if you could please speak up so that the people on the Zoom can hear, because there's a lot of you, so we have to spread out a little bit. And then the people that are on Zoom, if you guys have things that you would like to say, either use the raise your hand feature or physically wave your hand at me so that I see you, and then I'll make sure that you get recognized.
Good. Yep, Cindy, Michael, Harvey, good to have you here. Thank you for coming. Okay, we got a few sort of routine things to take care of, and then we get on to sort of the business of the Planning Commission. Any comments or a motion, please, to approve the minutes of the October meeting? They've been moved.
Seconded.
A second by Amy. Any discussion or questions or comments on those minutes? It was quite a meeting we had. Thank you, Deb, for making all those notes.
Yeah.
A few things to carry on tonight, of course, but I didn't hear any other questions. Okay, all those in favor of passing this motion to approve last month's minutes, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, none have done that. Public comment. Michael or Harvey or Cindy, anything other than what's on the agenda that you want to talk about tonight?
Not seeing anybody unmuting.
Okay. Tonight's agenda, pretty straightforward. How about let's approve this?
So moved.
Bob has moved to pass the agenda for tonight.
Second.
Amy second. Thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay. Planning Commission business, a quick thing from nominating committee before we get into agri-tainment regulations, and then proposed ordinance on amending the township's wireless facilities ordinance. Bob and Amy nominated.
Bob and I met, and we would like to nominate Chairman Gamble and Vice Chair Kent Baker to serve a second year in their current positions.
Okay, that seems to be a pattern that's established around here. I'm okay with that. Kent, you okay with that?
Sure.
Okay. It's kind of weird to have a vote on this, but let's do that. All those in favor?
Aye.
All opposed?
Jackie's on now.
Jackie. Oh, hi, Jackie.
Thank you, sorry.
No, hi, we're on nominating. How are you doing?
I'm good, how are you?
Good, thank you. Okay, that nomination suggestion passes. Agri-tainment regulations. Mark or Amy, do you want to walk through these? Well, actually, first of all, for the public comment, I'd like to actually have the Planning Commission and staff discuss what was transpired at last week's Board of Supervisors meeting. Have some conversation here. I think you'll hear that there's been a lot of progress, and while we'll have some questions, I'd like to have our conversation first and then open it up to members of the public to comment after that. So bear with us as we kind of wade through this. And Mark or Amy, do you want to go down through the whole thing, point by point? What's
Yeah.
the best way for you to approach this?
I think we should start, and we'll go point by point, and then there is a discussion piece for you guys, because the stuff we'll discuss first, the board has pretty much agreed to, and they just want to make sure you
Comments.
guys,
Right,
you guys are okay with
right.
it. So this all came from the joint meeting that we had at the beginning of October, which I think was great because we got a good idea of what our farming community is kind of looking for in terms of agri-tainment regulations. So a couple of changes that we made. We changed the definition to activities conducted on and accessory to a working agricultural operation and offered to the public or to invited groups for the purpose of recreation, education, or active involvement in the agricultural operation. These activities should be directly related to agricultural or natural resources and incidental to the agricultural operation. And I will say that Supervisor Harden asked that we change that should. No, it was must, and he asked us to change the must to should. So that's why it says these activities should be directly related. It originally said these activities must be. The board also discussed allowing agri-tainment in the rural, residential, agricultural, and natural areas districts. They discussed deleting the arterial street language, and then to address possible traffic concerns, we added language that prohibits parking in the right-of-way of a public street, so that would be no on-street parking. We deleted the square footage requirement for structures. We deleted the driveway access requirements. And then the board also decided that they would like to add outdoor amplified sound to the regulations. So we changed that language to mirror the outdoor amplified sound regulations and the special events regulations. So it says that outdoor amplified sound is prohibited after 10 p.m. Sunday through Thursday and after 11:30 on Fridays and Saturdays. We also heard from the board that they want to change the definition of a roadside stand to remove the language that only permits non-agricultural related items to be sold in roadside stands that are located along an arterial street. One thing I noted when I was putting the agenda together, we need to double back with the board to see if they also want to remove the regulation that no more than 200 square feet of the total floor area of the roadside stand can be related to items that are non-agricultural. So we'll need to talk with them again about that. And I think the discussion point for you guys this evening is that the board expressed a desire to see farm wineries and agricultural operations treated the same in terms of what types of events are allowed. The board indicated they're okay with allowing commercial, non-ag-related activities on a farm. We've been doing some research, and it's slightly problematic because allowing, kind of, to use a really bad pun, but you're kind of kicking the horse out of the barn. You're letting the horse out of the barn, and that's sort of a problem. But we did find, farm wedding regulations. We found farm stay regulations, and I'm sure I could find a definition for a farm festival. So I think if we could convince the board to leave the language that it has to be related to the ag operation, that closes the loop of someone coming in and going, I'm just going to have pageants and car shows and fireworks displays and skeet shooting and other things that maybe have nothing to do with a farm, and that then open up our rural areas to more commercial zoning type issues. So that's where we're at, and we wanted to discuss this language with you tonight. We still have the mapping and stuff that we'll talk with the board next month, but we're trying to do this in pieces to try to get where we need to be and kind of decipher what we want.
Do you want us to concentrate on this point 3 of the draft language, or provide comments from the top of the page? On our agenda, it starts with the changing of the definition of agri-entertainment. And you guys that just came in, we're actually having the Planning Commission and staff discuss this part of the agenda first, and then opening it up to public comment. So you kind of hear the gist of what the Board of Supervisors produced last week, how we're taking it a little further and massaging it, and then would invite your participation in that when we work through this. So sorry, back to my question.
So I would say the board's they really like the top language with the addition of the outdoor amplified sound. So if you guys have any comments on that, that would be very appropriate. I think Jeff has a comment.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't like the, in Part B, it says agri-entertainment enterprises shall remain subordinate and accessory to active agricultural operations at all times. So in my mind, I read that as subordinate means that the actual agricultural part of the property, how do you quantify that? And that's what you're saying. So you're saying, and by being subordinate, the most that the entertainment could make would be 49%. And then how would you quantify that, and how would you ever enforce that? And how would you know?
I'm not.
The agricultural enterprise
So I
shall
got
remain
that. Where did you get-
subordinate, which means that it should be less than half, because that's what a subordinate is.
That's what I didn't understand, where he was getting the 49% from.
You know what I'm saying? Am I making myself clear?
Perhaps not.
No?
I think what that was intended to mean, Jeff,
that?
is that you can't do something that's not related to what's the primary use of the property is, which in just about every case that we're talking about here, it would be an active agricultural operation.
Okay, for an example then, if I wanted to start a business and I have 10 acres and I grow hay, that's all I grow, hay, which makes it an agricultural business. But in that period of time, I decide that I'm going to put a barn up. Beautiful post and beam barn and do weddings. And my wedding catering makes me $20,000 a year, and I actually sell hay for $2,000. Doesn't seem like it's a subordinate enterprise to the agricultural part of that business. The other question I had about this was, do I actually have to live on this property? I don't see anywhere in there that it says that I do, so I could be an entrepreneur, just buy 10 acres anywhere and do this. And it doesn't say I actually have to be the farmer. So that 10 acres that the 8 acres that I do in hay, I can actually subcontract that off.
No, item C actually says, an agritainment enterprise shall be operated and maintained by the owner or operator of the active agricultural operation located on the property.
The operator is the part that when you say owner or operator, I can subcontract my farming. That would be my operator.
You can
So
lease
the
it,
owner
yeah.
of the land then doesn't even have to be the farmer. He just has to call Bickle to cut his hay and then put up his wedding barn or whatever he so wants to do, and he's just making a business.
Well, I think this relates
So it's
to,
not very clear.
it relates to this, the crux of this question of, where does farming and agritainment border on commercial use of a property that may or may not have much to do with agriculture.
And that's you're opening the door for foul play, let's say, because all of those things under the way that this is written, I could do.
Okay, so that needs rewording.
Anyway, that's why I didn't think that that was written stringently enough. It seems like we're opening the door to that.
Okay.
Are there other comments on this? I think this is really an important part here, is this notion of expanding to, maybe even the word expansion isn't right, but how tall and broad is this umbrella that would include agritainment on, ag, rural, residential, and natural areas districts?
So I will
I
say,
have a question.
oh, Cindy, can you wait just a second, please?
Can you wait just a sec, Cindy? Thank you.
So I will say that in a lot of the agritainment regulations that we've looked at across the state of Pennsylvania, they have the same language that we have about it has to be operated and maintained by the owner or the person who operates the farm. And it has a lot of the same language we have in here about shall remain subordinate and accessory to the agricultural operation. So it mirrors a lot of what we're seeing across the state. I think this is still a very huge wild, wild west kind of area that the state's probably going to have to come in with some sort of sensible regulations at some point, but I don't know that that's ever going to happen, so.
And I think something we talked about in the office that sort of goes along with what Jeff was saying is I think that the wedding venue thing specifically will depend entirely upon how the Board of Supervisors wants to define that. If the Board of Supervisors decides that weddings can be held in, existing barns or something like that, existing farm structures, that's potentially one thing as compared to building a facility simply to have weddings in. To us, that seems like it's a more commercial enterprise. It may or may not be related to the actual farm use that occurs on the property. So there's a difference in our mind from a zoning perspective about what the intention of that building is.
And so could that be captured or monitored, if you will, Todd, through the approval of a site plan that gets reviewed either
Well-
once or regularly?
Yeah, I think it can, but I think ultimately the question for the Board of Supervisors is they expressed an interest in allowing all commercial uses, regardless of whether or not that had anything to do with
Right.
the use that was going on in the farm. And if they do pursue that, it isn't gonna matter how we define it.
Right.
But if they revert to the older way of looking at it, that agritainment uses have to be reflective of the ag use occurring on the property, that's something we'll have to further define in order to make it clear.
Okay, so they're looking for direction, they're looking for at least some input from the planning commission on that point specifically.
I don't know that they're
I think it's
looking for input for that because they made it clear they want it to be agricultural, but
Yeah.
you get to express your opinion.
Yeah, got it. Jeff?
How do you quantify it? Then, one of my points about that was if I have an enterprise and I'm making a large percentage of my money off of this entertainment aspect and not really the agricultural, how would you ever know? Now, who do you even report that to? You know what I mean? It's just a trust situation, isn't it?
But it's not even really a trust situation. If it comes down on the side of you can use an existing farm structure to have weddings under certain conditions, however it's defined, it's probably not going to matter to us if they make more money doing that than they do the farming. If they're farming 365 days a year and they're having weddings 10 or 15 or 20, there's an obvious argument about what's the primary use and what's the accessory use on that property. If it's a matter of it allowing commercial on any property, regardless of whether there's any farming going on or not, then the point is moot.
I think too, for a lot of agri-entertainment definitions I've seen in other municipalities, it's why they require there to be a nexus between farming and the use, because then at least, if you're growing hay and you have something related to the farming of hay, it's probably going to be kind of self-regulating in terms of what you can do from a commercial aspect on your property. Obviously, wedding barns, there might be a few other examples of things that are a little outside of the scope of directly related to the hay farming, but generally speaking, requiring that connection has been how I think other municipalities has kept it in check to ensure you're not just having a commercial use on a property that also has someone growing alfalfa or what have you.
Yeah, it could be a lot more than just weddings. I mean, that's one issue.
Sure.
Sure.
But there's no saying that you're not going to have a rave there, or you're not going to have concerts there, because I was looking also about the music on Fridays and Saturdays, or you're going to build a yoga studio and a weightlifting room in the barn and open up a gym. There's no wording in here that stops any of that. And when you do that, then you leave that open for those kind of things to happen. You could also buy a house and a barn, and you could rent the house out for football weekends and never even live in the house, and then run an enterprise out of the barn, and you're still only cutting 8 acres of hay. And on that, then you don't have to follow any of the commercial construction things that would have to happen normally, like have your septic done, or have handicap parking, or handicap acceptable bathrooms, or you won't have to do any of that. You just open for business and go. And
I don't know if that last part is true, because in talking to Candy Wasson, when she built her new barn a few years ago, she got the agricultural exemption for the code office, and she told us that it was very strict, that they weren't allowed to do anything in there that wasn't ag, or else they had to, the code would come back and make them meet the building code for a commercial building.
Yeah, and John Tate had the same issue out on his property because he had to build a new building out there for the dogs. And I had to go to bat for him with the code office because they were trying to make him go through the harder building code, and he's an ag property. It was an ag business, so we actually worked with him on that. So I don't think we're throwing away that and people are going to use this. I think there may be some people that will give an inch and they'll take a mile, and that's what we're trying to guard against. I think agri-tainment's a great idea. I don't think that any of us think it's a bad idea. It's just the unintended consequences. And again, because I'm a weird township manager and I read these things, I mean, I read about these wineries out in Sunbury that are having 85 national bands come in and do concerts and a hot air balloon festival, and I'm not sure how any of that's related to the winery. And, then you hear about these terror farms. There was one in Upper Macungie, that's how they got their agri-tainment ordinance, where the neighbors had to listen to blood-curdling screams for 6 weeks out of the year for this terror farm that they didn't necessarily want to see. So I think there's a balancing act there, and trying to find where we're giving the farmers the opportunity, our ag community the opportunity to monetize their farm, because farming's not easy and we don't want them to go out of business, but also protecting so that the neighbors surrounding them aren't putting up with God knows what, what kind of businesses might show up or events might happen that have nothing to do with ag stuff. So that's the devil is in the details, I guess, is what they always say.
I think we tried to protect some of the rural residential, right? Is by keeping that out, so you wouldn't have agri-tainment butt up against the heavy, as a residential.
But as rewritten here.
Right, as rewritten, I understand that. I'm just saying, when we looked at one of the original intentions of this whole thing, it was.
Speak up, please.
Yeah, Bob, can you speak up?
One of the original intents of this was to provide some level of buffering so that agri-entertainment was not built up right next to heavily residential areas.
So that's why originally it was
Yep.
not allowed, we were
Right.
thinking not to allow it in this new rural residential.
That's right.
Jeff?
I went to an arts festival 2 weeks ago on a farm in Center County. It had 26 vendors. I don't think we ever thought about anything like that happening in this ordinance. And I didn't see anything that had to pertain to do, it was crafts, but I didn't see anything that had to do to pertain to that farm.
I have a question for, when the board was talking about allowing these types of, I'll call them non-accessory type uses, they weren't talking about adding that to agri-entertainment, they were talking about doing that as a special event. Is that correct or not?
I think they talked about doing it both, involving everything possible to allow the events.
Okay, I mean, I don't think we should be redefining agri-entertainment to include weddings and other types of or semi-commercial type activities, but maybe if we could do some of these things as just a special event, a one-time only permit, or, you would get a permit for each event, and then that would allow the ag uses to have these events, but it would also allow the township to have some parameters for how often you could do it, how many times a year you could do it. Just limit the potential damage that could occur to the neighboring properties is my biggest concern.
I don't think the supervisors, from what we heard last week, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think they're inclined to want to go the permit route.
Okay, so, I mean, and while we're on that, so one of the things I heard a few times from the Board of Supervisor meeting is they said, well, let's just let it happen. We don't anticipate problems, and if we have a problem, then we'll deal with it. Well, my concern is the townships, once you establish regulations, it's kind of, and somebody has a use established, my concern is if you come in and try to regulate it after the fact, that they will be able to claim that their event is grandfathered, and they'll be able to continue to do it. So if we're gonna have those types of uses, I would like to put, some type of limitations that it be permitted for a specified amount of time, and at least at the end of the year, have to redefine it in case, and I'm not anticipating a problem either, but something could happen. Jeff was describing things that, if that popped up in an area, out on, in a very rural township road that couldn't handle that type of situation, that would give the township an opportunity to relook at it later so that it doesn't perpetuate. So I'm saying, yeah, let's go ahead and allow this, but let's just put some limitations on it. Maybe have it separately from the agri-entertainment uses, just have it as its own, special event type permit.
Or registration, maybe not
Right,
even
so
necessarily.
it would be allowed. I'm saying that. I'm not saying it's not allowed. I'm just saying we need to have some type of control so that, if it gets out of hand, the township would be able to deal with the flack that we would get from all the neighbors coming in, sitting out here screaming at us for letting this happen.
Yeah, and I would like to point out, I pointed this out at other meetings, but when we talk about special events, we should probably call them something different, because the special event process we have in place now was enacted basically to register events. There's never been a permit or a license issued. It was basically to register events so that the sponsor of the event agrees to reimburse the township for any costs that are associated with the event, be it police services, cleanup, anything else. So we're not really regulating events in any way other than to say, if you don't register it at least 30 days prior to the event, you can't hold the event. So the special events registration process we have in effect now doesn't really regulate anything. So every time we've talked at Planning Commission and Board of Supervisors meetings the last 6 months about applying the special event registrations to these types of things, there is no direct application in the context that we're trying to talk about here.
Okay. Well, again, my comment to the board would be, let's allow these uses to some degree. We'll have to define what we're going to allow. But, you know, put it on some type of permit basis so that if anybody does, you know, get out of hand or start doing things that aren't good for the rest of the township or the neighboring properties, that the township then has a position to stand on to be able to, you know, discontinue that in the future.
Could you do like an annual registration?
Well, I was thinking this ties into the, you know, to the end of the ordinance, or the changes here, where there's a narrative, a site plan that's defined, and then it's got to be a narrative that includes the following information, you know, all the things that are going to happen. And yeah, sure, why could not that have an annual or biannual review period and make it at a time that wasn't onerous for the farm cycle, the yearly farm cycle? Maybe it's in the middle of late winter or something. So I think there's a way to require information and then to come back and take corrective action if needed, if someone's abusing it.
I have a question concerning this. This is kind of going with what you're talking about. Chris.
Yeah.
Sedalia, can you speak up so the people on Zoom can hear?
Is maybe if I move over.
That's what he's.
Move the speaker.
Okay.
Remove the microphone, I mean.
Just going with what you were talking about, Chris, in terms of safety. Just my question that I have is, if there are agri-tainment events that are taking place, or people are looking to have take place, how does the board feel about the concern of liability or safety concerns if something would happen? Who would be liable for that? Would it be the business or the township?
I think a lawyer would probably tell you both. You know, the running phrase with things like that is lawyers often take the shotgun approach. They name everybody in a suit and see what wins. So I would think that the municipality would be held liable in some respect, no matter what the situation.
But the state did just pass a law about liability for agricultural operations that are having agri-tainment activities. And they have very specific things. I think it's either within the law or the Farm Bureau put out information that you need to do. You have to post signage that you're having these events on your property, things you have to do to limit the liability exposure from the farm side of things.
Is there a special insurance that a business would have to acquire in addition to just the general use?
I don't know about that, but I think Rebecca does.
I'm not a lawyer, but I have read several ordinances, as you have, and guidance for ordinances. And what I have read says that the township, the municipality, does not have liability unless they sponsor the event.
Yeah.
So if you're regarded as sponsoring the event, then you would have some liability. But if it's simply agri-tainment, it's a business. I mean, farming is a business. Agri-tainment is considered part of farming now, part of the right to farm. And there has been a law passed in Pennsylvania this year that means that it's to prevent nuisance lawsuits. Things like saying, oh, my son stood up on the wagon and decided to jump off, and now I'm going to sue you for that. So the farmer needs to either post signs or put on wristbands or somehow make the clientele aware that they're taking some risk when they come on a farm, and that will protect them from nuisance lawsuits. It would not protect you from actual liability of doing something stupid. And if we do, we're going to get sued, and we're going to be out of business. I mean, that's the way it works. So everybody's very well aware that they could lose their farm if they do something stupid.
Yeah, my only concern is.
But the township
yeah.
would be okay,
Yeah.
as long as you're not saying this is our corn festival.
Yeah, I guess my only concern is just safety, especially when it's concerning minors who may be attending some of the events without having kind of a parent or an adult supervision. Because I know that I've let my kids go to like People's Choice and things on their own. So my only concern is that the board, take into consideration safety and liability for, especially in events of minors that are attending events, because anything can happen outside of just the business use. Somebody can come, into the property and do something potentially to an individual.
I think you'll find that farmers are very aware of unaccompanied children. And we don't necessarily welcome them.
And minors, like 16 years old or yeah.
16, yeah, but,
Yeah.
we are very aware, and it's in all the farm magazines, the Farm Bureau, all the possible things that can go wrong. People will be careful because they don't want to lose their farm to a lawsuit. And if a group of kids come unaccompanied, they're probably gonna suddenly be accompanied by someone watching what they do. I don't let kids climb on our tractor because, it would be fun to do that, but we don't let them do that because that could be dangerous. We're aware of things.
Thank you, Sue. I think
You're welcome.
it's a good point to be mindful of. Amy, haven't heard from you. What are your thoughts on this, particularly this essential question of expanding commercial
I
utilization?
Thank you, Chris. I appreciate this conversation. I think that some of the scenarios that have been described are things that I would not have imagined. So I really appreciate the dialogue because it helps sort of explore things that no one of us could imagine. But I think the intention behind this ordinance is to help support farmers, and I think we're making strides in that direction. I'm not sure we're there yet. And so it's my understanding that this is a conversation, but it's really a Board of Supervisors decision.
Yes.
And it seems to me that we're not there yet. That would be my assessment.
Randy, do you have thoughts on this to add to what's been provided tonight?
No, I don't know that I do. Your question makes me think of the fire hall having birthdays and giving children rides on the fire trucks. Is there a special insurance, a liability insurance that the fire company has?
So that's probably the best example that's closest to this agri-tainment, because the fire company does that completely on their own, right? They have these birthday parties and they rent out the fire hall and things, and I'm sure they do carry insurance for those things, but the township, just like Tussey Mountain, when they have all their wing-offs and things, we have nothing to do with those events. They file, the Tussey Mountain case, they file the special events registration with us, but that's it. So I don't think the township has any liability in it. I think it's up to the individual organization to decide and talk with their insurance carrier to figure out what kind of insurance they need.
For that matter, the carnival itself. I mean,
Yeah.
on the fire hall.
And I can tell you in the
Property.
instance of the carnival, there was someone many years ago who tripped and fell and tried to sue. They tried to sue the township, and the township was thrown out of the suit right away because it's not our event. So.
Jeff or Bob or Kent, other comments on this?
I kind of like the way we originally wrote it, and can you give me some insight to why the supervisors, did they think that was too specific? Or what was the complaint about the way it was originally written?
I think the way it was originally written, after the joint meeting, I think we heard that there wasn't enough flexibility for the agricultural community. It was a little too, I don't want to say too much, but it was a little too narrowly focused, and it was also maybe a little discriminatory towards some of the farms that weren't located on the arterial streets. So the supervisors, I think after that meeting, and I think you guys probably heard the same thing, but I think the supervisors really wanted to find a way forward that gave a little more flexibility to the farming community so that they could do some of these things. And that's when we did some more, we've done a ton of research on this, and that's when we did some more research on how agri-tainment is handled across the state of Pennsylvania. And we found in Lancaster County this great, it's a workbook for their municipalities for if they're gonna allow agri-tainment. And it's like an if-then statement. If you have this regulation, then you can do this. If you don't have this regulation, then you can't do this, but you could do this. And so it was really helpful because it laid out, they had worked with their farm bureau, their tourism agency, and then the county commissioners to craft what this workbook is. I actually gave it to the Center County Commissioners and said, you might want to think about this for the county because we're not the only ones talking about agritainment. But it was very helpful because it walked through a lot of things, and we have the site plan regulations, they had in theirs a checklist. And the checklist, it would like, tell us what you're planning on doing and check off these broad categories and then list anything else. And then did you call DEP? Did you call whatever state agencies might be regulating what you're doing? And it lists the state agencies. Did you call whatever federal agencies? List them. And then the municipality has the opportunity to sign off on it. And they address the special event in there. They address also special event language as well if a municipality doesn't have that and they want to think about adopting it and regulating some of this through that. So it was very helpful. And then as we sat down as a staff and sort of talked about what we wanted to do, hearing what the board wanted to do, we were trying to incorporate some of those ideas into the draft language.
I have one little detail, and when dealing with the amplified sound, I guess our existing regulations say after 10 p.m. Sunday through Thursday, and after 11:30 p.m. on Fridays and Saturdays. Have you ever had an issue with not having a beginning time to that?
Not that I'm aware of.
No.
Okay. Okay, it's just, nobody has a problem starting early morning type thing.
Well, I will say, there may have been a call or two over the years where somebody asked when it could start, when the noise could start.
Mm-hmm.
And the answer was, there is no starting time. So, yeah.
We get more complaints about construction starting early than anything.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Or the roosters.
Yeah, the roosters. Yeah, the roosters.
Let's, anyone, Cindy or Michael, because of some other, the Hawks are here, Harvey, any comments on this before we sort of summarize and wrap up for staff to take back to the supervisors? Kind of hear what we're debating and what we're wrestling with here, and input, comments, questions would be helpful at this time.
Cindy had wanted to say something, I think.
Yeah, Cindy, earlier you wanted to say something.
Yeah, I did. I just wanted to point out, I don't know, I didn't catch the gentleman's name, Chris, to your left, 2 people over.
Jeff.
Yeah, he was reading from a document about, he kind of kicked off this part of the meeting, but what he read included the phrase arterial streets. And I just wanted to point out that we did have that discussion at the board meeting last week, and that was one of the things that we decided was kind of discriminatory. We don't want to have that in there. I'm not sure what that document he was reading from was, and I think Amy has, everything is up to date on Amy's side. I just didn't want that to get lost in the cracks somewhere because we wanted to do away with that expression. And my second comment is kind of to address a point that Kent made about, wanting to head off trouble at the pass. Not wanting to allow a farm to have some kind of activity that causes all sorts of problems for the neighbors or traffic or safety or whatever. And the suggestions that we made to the board as a farm community were to try and keep the guidelines or the regulations more broad rather than making them so specific. Like, it makes sense to say you can't make noise or you can't use broadcast sound after a certain time of day. That makes sense. It makes sense to say if you're going to have this many cars, you need to provide for parking. You can't park on the street. Those kinds of guidelines make sense. We can work around those, but we hated to see the regulations, the ordinance become so specific that we are regulated out of business opportunities that we might not even be able to foresee at this time.
Absolutely a great point. You have to provide enough flexibility for unforeseen futures and not so narrow, but not so wishy-washy and broad that anything goes. So it's finding that happy medium is what we're about.
Yes. Thank you.
And the arterial street thing is off the table, Cindy, so thank you for pointing that out, but that's not it's not an issue at this point.
And I would like to make the point, I'm not sure it's exactly relevant, but it doesn't really have to do with the farm community, but I had occasion to drive through Pine Grove Mills on Sunday morning. And it's a really good thing that they don't have this rule about not parking on streets, or the Naked Egg would have a hard time staying in business. And it's not a good thing necessarily. I mean, I recognize the safety issues, but it was very, it was kind of glaring to drive through and see all those cars parked on, Route 4526. And we're talking about not allowing people to park on any street in the township when they're at an agritainment kind of event.
Anyone else have comments from the general public?
I will say.
Can you just come a little closer, because I forgot to set up the podium today.
There's a mic right there.
I had anesthesia today, so I might get a little loopy, but I don't think so.
We'll let you know.
And I'm fine, so that's good. Just a reminder that there is a requirement of 10 acres or more for this to happen. So when you're thinking of neighbors, you're not thinking of a 5-acre property, a 2-acre property, a 1-acre property. You're thinking of somebody who has at least 10 acres to work with. And that does give us opportunity to plan for parking and to make things work out and to do our ag operation, but still have some occasional agritainment type activities that will help us stay in business. So I don't have a lot to add to what Cindy said, but just remember that we have acreage and we want to be able to offer opportunities for people in this township to enjoy what we have in agriculture, to really come and appreciate what's there. And we need these permissions to be able to do it. I mean, it's happening. So I guess that's where I'm at. I've written other specific things which the supervisors have, Amy has, and I appreciate your widening the language, broadening things so that we do have broader opportunities, because that's what we need.
Yeah, and that's what we're looking for too.
Yeah, and there's also, besides the Lancaster County guidelines, which were in 2009, there's a more recent one. It's either Vermont or New Hampshire that comes up. Same ideas of allowing agriculture to have opportunities. I can try to find the link again. I might have emailed it to somebody.
Okay, that would be great.
Yeah.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Hi, this is Susan Houck. I just wanted to say that Cindy and Rebecca speak my mind. I agree with them.
Great, thank you for affirming that. Okay, so how can we be helpful to you to help the supervisors understand where we're at a bit of a concern around too expansive versus too restrictive?
Right, I captured Kent's thoughts about some type of, maybe a permit or something to allow these things so that we can kind of step into it, and we can certainly take that back to the supervisors. We've also continued to do some research ourselves to see if we can find sort of a more tightened up definition that allows for some of these farm stays, farm festivals, farm wineries, but maybe doesn't kick the door open all the way for the more purely commercial events. So
A weight room and a yoga studio.
yeah, a gym or something
Sure,
on
sure.
a farm. Or someone taking the open space land in the Iraqi farm and building a boutique hotel on it and calling it, something that is not a farm stay, is not a bed and breakfast. So we have been looking at that type of information as well, and we'll go back to the board in December and suggest, maybe we want to look at this permit basis or registration basis or something that gives us a way, because the concern is very valid that if something happens and someone's been doing I use these terror farms as an excuse. I really have nothing against them, but somebody's doing these terror farms and people are complaining that they have to listen to blood-curdling screams for 6 weeks out of the year. And the supervisors try to regulate it and they say, well, we've been doing it for 6 weeks out of the year, so
Right.
now you can't. You
Right.
let, you let the horse out for that. So we'll take all that back and see what we can come up with. It's just, I feel like we're so close to getting what we need out of these agri-tainment regulations, but the devil is truly in the details on this one matter. So trying to figure out this last piece of the puzzle, and I'll look for the Vermont and New Hampshire guidelines
I've
that,
forgotten which one it was, but it's one of those states that has a number of not real large commercial farms, but farms that have, they want to stay in business in the state, stay ag, but they need to be able to do some other activities.
so we'll definitely, thank you, we'll definitely look for those regulations as well, so we can take something back in December and say this is kind of where we're at on this.
Okay. Anything else you need from us on this tonight?
I don't think so.
Okay, let's move on, please, then, to the item C of new business for the Planning Commission, proposed ordinance on amending the township's wireless facilities ordinance. Devil in the details, holy cow. Yeah. So I think we've got it, we can do some summarizing here and hit the points that us non-communication technical types might be able to be helpful with.
Yeah, so first of all, I'd like to say that if you read all of this, I really hope you have insomnia and this helps you get to sleep at night. Because those of us that had to read it for a living, we were like, So the state passed a new law regulating wireless facilities. And the wireless facility industry had been really upset because municipalities try to keep these things, to keep a tight handle on where they're allowed. So the state passed a law over the summer, and it limits our ability to regulate these small cell wireless facilities. And these wireless facilities have to be allowed in all of our zoning districts as a permitted use in their public rights of way. The facilities can also be co-located on municipal-owned poles, and that's a discussion point ultimately for the Board of Supervisors. And if you have any thoughts on that, they do have language in there about the hierarchy of the municipally owned poles, and the decorative streetlights would be the last thing under that hierarchy. It also sets forth a shot clock, so there's a time limit on everything and that Todd has to review and how fast it has to get done. And it sets forth a fee schedule, which we don't have a fee schedule right now for these facilities, so I don't think we have any, except we have the big towers, we don't have any of the smaller ones, but if we did get some to come in here, we would be able to charge that fee, and also allows the wireless providers, if they want to put in 10 or 20 in an area, they can do that under one permit rather than getting separate permits for everything. So we actually contracted the Cohen Law Group out of Pittsburgh. They're sort of the experts on all of this, and they prepared our original wireless facilities ordinance to prepare the necessary amendments to the ordinance. So what they gave you was the original ordinance that they marked up with the changes in it. Again, there's not a lot we can actually change within it because it's the state law. They did create, and this we felt was important to protect the village in some of our more residential areas. They did create a stealth guideline, a design manual that calls for the stealth technology, because that's allowed for in the law. And that was sort of why we wanted them to help update the language for us. So we do have both of these. If you have any questions, I know Mark had a question or two that he noted in there. He's not the director of planning and zoning. I forgot to take that out as comment.
But he can be if he wants to be.
He wants to be both. But if you guys have any specific questions, we can certainly go back to the attorney and ask those questions about this ordinance. Again, everybody in the Center Region is doing this right now. We had they gave you till October 29th, but then they said if you did it later, it's okay, because it just means that if somebody came in between October 29th and when you updated the ordinance, they would just fall under the state law, not your ordinance. So, yes, Jeff.
I did not read the whole thing, so it might be in here. But this technology is moving so fast, the companies, I'm the same carrier, but it's been bought 3 times. And so that could happen here. And so is there something, just like the towers, that, if a carrier comes through your residence and puts stuff up on the poles and we think it's all cool and stealthy, and then 2 years later they go out of business, or 5 years later out of business, can we get it taken down?
Yeah, there's stuff in
They have
here
to do a
for,
bond?
yeah.
Yep. I mean, I guess I would also ask if you had any thoughts on allowing co-location on municipal poles. Right now, it has the hierarchy listed in the ordinance, and they are power poles first, traffic signage poles without traffic signals, traffic signal poles, and then decorative light poles. So if you have any feelings on that. My only feeling is after the traffic signal was just taken out a couple weeks ago, I don't need to go through that again.
It is a source of income, though, right?
Yes. Yeah, it is a source of income. I mean, we'll charge permits, so.
Oh, no, I mean, they would pay a yearly fee or
Yeah, and a
something.
yearly
So,
fee.
yeah, well, where'd the $270 come from?
That's what's allowed by the law.
Okay. Statewide,
Yes. They put all the fees within the law. They encapsulated it.
okay.
And I will say the law was worked on by all the municipal associations, plus attorneys for them, plus attorneys on the other side. So I think
So if you have if you have 3 of them on one pole, you would get 3 times that amount?
I believe so, yes.
Okay.
So that suggests there might be a maximum that you could fit on a pole?
I don't know. I would assume so, but I don't know.
But that's, if we have to base, that's based on future technology. I mean, you could fit 15 this year and next year 500, or in 10 years 515, because now they're this big. So I don't know if it's a size or a square footage or.
Patton Township has some that were co-located on some light poles out by Target. And they're actually well done. You can't really notice them unless you look, because they're sort of just an extension of the top of the pole. And Ferguson, I think it's Ferguson has one over by the Northland Center that's on a flagpole. But then the borough has one outside of the old auto port that's ugly, and you can tell it's,
Right.
I mean, you can tell what it is. It's just sticking up straight in
Yeah.
the middle of the parking lot.
Yeah, I remember when they were putting that in.
So
about-
for our decorative type lamp poles, light poles, they'll have to do some level of conformance. So, okay.
Yeah, the design manual basically says they have to use stealth technology so that the average passerby isn't going to notice that there's this structure on top of it. And they have to try to blend it, and they have to try to make it look like a tree or a shrub, which really makes me think of my set designs from shows I was in, but we'll hope it's a little nicer than that.
So the hierarchy of utility poles, is this really something you need us, anyone has any thoughts on, or do you have suggestions?
I mean, if you guys are okay with leaving that in, we'll pass that on to the supervisors and just say that you guys were okay with this. Because, I mean, I think having this design manual is sort of key, because it lays out, you can't just stick the thing on the pole and it sticks out.
Put them up everywhere. Everybody wants them.
Just charge them. A lot.
Well, I noticed that in a few places there was language commenting about providing justification, particularly with the tower-based, or a large, or adding a new pole, that you had to provide justification that it couldn't be, located on an existing facility. So, but those sections were pretty open-ended. They didn't really say, how they would justify it. So they'll come in with a justification, and our board will say, okay or not okay. I don't know that they
It's
have.
not our board, it's Todd.
Yeah, great.
Oh, is it the zoning officer?
Yeah, it goes through the zoning officer, it doesn't go through board approval.
Okay. So you have to decide whether or not it sounds justified or not. I didn't
We'll
see.
see how that works.
Yeah.
So are we basically just talking about areas that are populated?
Areas of what, Jeff?
Populated. I mean, they're not really talking about expanding this. I just went camping for 5 days and had no cell service for 5 days, and I could amazed how much I missed it, especially GPS.
From what I've read
So they're
about
not talking about going back there by Bear Meadows or up on top of the mountain or any place else in Harris Township. They're just talking about basically where everybody lives.
Yeah, from what I've read, this was initially at least a way for cell companies to fill in dead spots without having to install large towers. So if that's still the impetus to construct these things, I wouldn't guess you'd see them everywhere, but who knows?
So they're not gonna, it gets lost in the maze anyhow with all the other poles. you know, the clutter.
Yeah, I mean, I think where you're seeing them, and the impetus for all of this was there were municipalities across the state that were denying these structures and saying that, you know, the radio frequencies and other concerns. And so the wireless facilities community went to the state and said, we can't expand. They tried this with cable franchises a while ago, but we can't expand, and we want to expand and be able to help people with cell coverage and things, so we need your help, and that's where this all came from. And I did note in here that the tower, the large ones, those are a conditional use now. They would go through the Board of Supervisors, but the small ones would go in a permit process.
That's helpful.
Just want something for Shingle Town.
I want to make a phone call on Saturday football home game.
Yeah.
Okay, anything else on this wireless facilities ordinance from?
Do you need a motion from us, or?
If you're so inclined to recommend that this go to the board, that would be great.
Okay.
So
Ken- Bob is moving that this move up to the Board of Supervisors. Jeff seconds. All those in favor of putting this up to the, forwarding this rather to the Board of Supervisors, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Opposed? Great. Let's move on to reports. Are there zoning permits?
There's zoning permits
Going
right here.
around?
You
Okay,
skipped,
we'll
you
look at
skipped
those.
agenda for December.
Amy, CRPC?
I have nothing to report. The committee did not meet. We will resume our meetings at the beginning of December.
Okay. And I was a little confused. George sent minutes, but he dated those September. So in fact, that they did not meet, and
I
he's
don't-
repeating?
Yeah, I don't know that have they met again? I don't think they've met again. I think that was the last.
Okay, so he provided a little more detail on that one. Okay. Bob, Spring Creek Watershed?
haven't met yet this month.
Okay.
So we're on tap for.
And I guess, okay, thank you. And Randy, I guess Village Parking has met once?
They have met once, the initial meeting. They tried to identify a chair for the committee. They identified some issues to address. They decided to meet the second Tuesday of each month. And they identified residents' business enforcement, other villages, and how many parking spaces are needed. And we were advised to approach the fire hall and churches to explore a possibility of parking spaces that they might be able to provide. So there's an agenda established for the future meetings.
And a lot to cover.
Was anybody on your committee from the churches or the fire hall?
No.
I don't believe so, no.
No, but one of the suggestions was that we invite them to a future meeting. After we've done, I think we'll do some goal setting next time. But after we've done a little more work, have them come and talk a little bit about shared use parking, because they've sort of been talked about for all these years, and I don't know that anybody's ever approached them through the years to ask about using the parking.
Well, it's important for sure. Thank you for participating in that.
Spring Parkwood is also mentioned, but it's township property, so it's not really an issue.
Right.
Where the fire hall and churches are under other control.
Okay, thank you very much. Recent actions by the Board of Supervisors.
Well, I'll
okay.
just jump back because we skipped the agenda for December.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay. We were thinking that if you don't have a plan, any plans that need action, perhaps you could take December off since you're butting up against the week of the holidays.
Unless there are no plans, that sounds great.
Okay. And then under the board, they approved the Bowl Beer Works preliminary land development plan, and they discussed the draft regulations to the agritainment. And then we did look at the comments that we got back on the Bowl Avenue road diet. They were overwhelmingly not in favor of the road diet, but there were only 105 responses. So what the supervisors discussed was just kind of putting a pin in that for right now, waiting until we see what they're going to do with 322, where that alignment might go, and then revisiting the conversation. The discussion point the supervisors had was, it was sold as a bike ped thing, but really it was for traffic flow, and so they felt like that part of the story wasn't told. So we're putting a pin in it for right now, and then we'll probably revisit this in a year or two once we know what's going on with 322. And they also provided comment on the Center Region's Climate Action and Adaptation Plan, which the General Forum will approve this month.
You really think a year or two we'll know about the road situation?
Well, so it's interesting. What PennDOT told us at the public meetings was they were going to pick an alignment by 2024 so they could move forward. But then we reached out to PennDOT at the suggestion of a resident, and we reached out and said, hey, would you sit down with the Board of Supervisors and the Potter Township Board of Supervisors and do a charrette? And like get the mapping updated, and let's talk about the goals of the project, what we're trying to solve, what's the problem, because no one seems to know if it's getting people to 80 or getting people to State College, and I think that's a key part of the problem. And so they were agreeable to that, but then they wrote back and they said, this was in October, they wrote back last week and said, well, we're still updating more mapping, we'll let you know when we're ready to meet with you. We found that things were really out of date. And a lot of people have questioned the cost estimates because they never updated. They kept saying it was $690 million. But $690 million was whatever number they took from 2004, and then they just inflated it about $200 million. So nobody knows what alignment that's based on, if that's based on an alignment or if that's just some number that someone came up with. So they're looking at some more things. And then it's great. We've got a lot of grassroots stuff going on in the township as well, which are a lot of residents that have been mobilized and people in Potter Township that have been mobilized. So I was hoping that if we got everybody in the room together, we could figure this thing out and, let the people that actually live here have a say in what's going on. So we'll see.
So you're saying that the PennDOT is amenable to having that meeting?
They're amenable to it on their schedule, yes.
Yeah,
That's-
on it, right.
Yep.
Right. Interesting. Very interesting. Okay, anything else for the commission tonight? And likely no meeting next month. So we're adjourned tonight, meeting is over, and we'll see you in January or sooner.